An American lesson in civilization, hidden in plain sight. The American transportation system is nothing more than a disorganized pastiche, a haphazard imitation. Those were the original words of Professor Heinrich von Schuler, a renowned German urbanist, spoken from the stage of a public forum at the University of California, Berkeley. He stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the auditorium with a characteristic air of intellectual superiority. "There is no original design philosophy, no urban ethos," he continued, his voice crisp and precise. "It is merely a brute force copy of European and, ironically, its own outdated American models." The hall fell silent. Not a single person offered a rebuttal. Heinrich felt a familiar satisfaction in that silence, interpreting it as a wordless admission of his correctness. But who could have predicted that 30 minutes later, he would walk alone into a Bay Area rapid transit, BART station, preparing to travel to his next survey point, and that during the journey from Powell Street Station in San Francisco to Rockridge in Oakland, a scene of such incredible, understated civility would stop him in his tracks? He said nothing, standing frozen, his tablet forgotten in his hand. He had always believed American cities were mere imitations, loud and chaotic. But in that moment, he felt for the first time how an urban space could be so considerate, so gentle, so profoundly warm. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at the desk in his hotel room, staring blankly at a photograph he had taken of the train platform. He began to question whether this nation, which he had long viewed as technologically powerful but culturally adolescent, was perhaps closer to true civilization than the place he had come from. Berlin, Germany, January 2025. The temperature hovered near freezing. The city streets were awash of cold, pale gray. Inside a conference room at the Technical University of Berlin's Traffic Management Center, a group of experts engaged in a heated debate around a digital map. Presiding over the meeting was Heinrich von Schuler, the city's most senior urban planning consultant. At 56, he was a veteran, having advised the German government on transportation reform and contributed to several major smart city projects across Europe. He called himself a system nationalist, a believer that logic, regulations, and meticulous calculation could solve any public problem. To him, America was little more than an efficient but soulless economic powerhouse. When he was told he would be traveling to the United States as an official observer for an intelligent transportation symposium, he barely concealed his disdain. What could a nation obsessed with sprawling suburbs and consumerism possibly have to show? No matter how advanced their tech, it would just be a chaotic mix of functions. His colleagues advised him to lower his expectations. The trip was merely a political gesture, a symbol of Germany's technological goodwill toward North America. For Heinrich, a symbolic mission like this was the perfect excuse for a short vacation. While packing, he did almost no research, downloading only a basic map of San Francisco's BART and Muni systems. He didn't even read the provided research papers. His plan was simple: take a few photos, deliver some well-polished remarks, eat a few good meals, and return to Berlin to file a boilerplate report about how the U.S. was still playing catch-up to European technological and social integration. Berkeley, California. The 8th of February 2025. The sun was bright, the air crisp with a hint of the bay. UC Berkeley was hosting a public forum on urban management, titled The Human Digital Nexus, Forging Integrated Transportation. Heinrich was invited as the international keynote observer, scheduled to speak at 11 a.m. A small stir went through the auditorium as he walked to the stage. Academics, city officials, and a large number of students were in attendance. Many had heard of this father of European systems, but no one was prepared for the tone of his opening words. "In my eyes, America's transportation system is a truly disorganized pastiche," he began, his delivery unhurried and every word perfectly enunciated. The attendees wearing translation headsets frowned in unison. Whether it's your so-called intelligent rail systems or your app-based connectivity platforms, they are, in essence, imitations of European or North American design patterns. They lack a foundational philosophy and have failed to create their own transportation ethic. You may be admirable in your technological brute force, but that is not a system. It is a mere aggregation of functions. No one responded. Even the moderator simply offered a polite nod. This pleased Heinrich. He was accustomed to such situations. When no one dared to argue, it usually meant he was right. He collected his notes and walked off the stage. A German journalist traveling with him handed him a bottle of water. That might have been a bit harsh, Heinrich. He shrugged. "I spoke the truth. The US just puts a friendly user interface on a fundamentally copied system. He took a sip of water, a hint of self-satisfaction in his voice. This afternoon, let's go see the real train system. Perhaps even the station announcements are just a modified version of a German algorithm. After the lecture, he refused the chauffeured car arranged by the organizers, insisting on taking the BART himself to visit the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency's hub. "I want to experience the reality," he said. In truth, he wanted to find more real-world flaws to give his verdict more weight. 1:45 p.m. Heinrich walked into the Powell Street BART station. The platform was immaculate, hardly a scrap of paper to be found. A station agent stood in a corner, quietly directing people. No one was shouting. There were no blaring announcements that a train was approaching, only the soft chime and countdown of the digital sign above the platform screen doors. Near the elevator, an elderly man with mobility issues was being guided by a uniformed transit ambassador onto the train. Heinrich instinctively observed their movements, trying to find a flaw in the standardized procedure, but the interaction was so calm and proficient that he didn't even raise his camera. Once on the platform, he boarded an Orange Line train heading toward Oakland. He had deliberately avoided rush hour, thinking that an off-peak train would more readily expose the system's underlying chaos. The doors slid open. He stepped into the car, and the moment he stood in the center of the carriage, everything changed. The car was not crowded, but not empty either. Every passenger was quietly occupied. A student typed on a laptop. A young mother gently patted her sleeping baby's back. Near the window, a construction worker in his work boots was catching a nap, his head resting against the glass. What astonished him most was that no one was talking. Not even the tinny sound of music leaking from earbuds could be heard. No music, no announcements, no chatter, only the smooth hum of the train and the rhythmic flash of lights from the transbay tube. Every stop was precise. No jolts, no one pushed, no one scrambled for a seat. A young man in a suit stood near the doors. As he prepared to exit, he gently pressed the door-open button to illuminate it, and then held his arm out to keep the door from closing on an elderly woman behind him. She gave a small nod. Not a single word was exchanged between them. The doors closed. Heinrich remained standing in the same spot, his mind a complete blank. This is an American transit system? As the question formed in his mind, he felt a pang of shame. He suddenly remembered his words from the forum "disorganized pastiche." They felt like a cold stone striking him in the chest. A few minutes later, he arrived at Rockridge Station. As he stepped off the train, his pace was slow. The portable camera in his hand was still on, but he didn't press the shutter again. "This is not the America I know," he repeated 3 times in his mind. That afternoon, he did not go to the transportation center as planned. Instead, he sat alone on a bench outside the station for a full 20 minutes. He wrote no reports, took no photos, and spoke to no one. He was reassessing not his view of the US, but the Eurocentric worldview he had held unquestioned for 30 years. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at the desk in his San Francisco hotel, scrolling through the photos he had taken of the BART. The images were mundane, no special angles, no dramatic compositions, but he looked at them again and again. He even opened his laptop, intending to write down a few thoughts, but he didn't know where to begin. He was beginning to realize that American civilization wasn't in its technology, but in that quiet, unassuming order. Those few minutes on the train had shattered a pillar of his professional identity. A truly civilized society, perhaps, wasn't one that used an automated voice to tell you how to behave. It was one where everything was already prepared for you before you even realized you needed it. He sat like that all night until the first light of dawn seeped through the window. The next morning at 7 a.m., San Francisco was not yet fully awake, but the streets were coming to life. The warm yellow light from corner coffee shops spilled onto the sidewalks. A street sweeper moved past in a quiet hum. He sat silently by the window of a small breakfast diner, a simple mug of black coffee beside him, and a still steaming breakfast burrito on a paper plate. It was a place he'd found himself after refusing the hotel's buffet. There was no English menu because there was no menu at all, just a list on a chalkboard. There was no QR code ordering, no automated payment kiosk. He had simply stood in line, watched what the office worker in front of him ordered, and repeated it. 1 breakfast burrito, 1 black coffee. The woman behind the counter didn't ask any follow-up questions, just nodded and placed his change neatly on the counter. He suddenly realized that here, service wasn't a performance. There were no excessive smiles, no forced enthusiasm. Yet every step was perfectly attentive. This kind of quiet, competent service felt both foreign and deeply comforting. After breakfast, he walked out of the diner. The sun was beginning to cast long shadows, revealing the waking rhythm of the city. He didn't hurry to his rescheduled appointment at the transportation agency. Instead, he wandered aimlessly, wanting to see what other contradictions this city that had stunned him yesterday held in store. He came to a crosswalk and found that cars would automatically stop for pedestrians, even if the pedestrian signal was still a flashing hand. No police, no crossing guards, no whistles. Yet the cars stopped. Not just once, but 10 times, 20 times. He stood on the corner of a busy street and watched 4 light cycles. Every time, whether it was a city bus, a delivery truck, or a taxi, as soon as a pedestrian stepped toward the crosswalk, the vehicles would come to a complete, unhurried stop. No one gunned their engine, no one honked their horn. It was as if he were standing in the middle of a theater where everyone intuitively followed an unwritten script, a silent, cooperative orderliness, as if the traffic laws had been absorbed into the collective spirit. He thought of the streets he walked every day in Berlin. The moment the light turned green, drivers would aggressively accelerate. Pedestrians would rush across, scolded if they were a second too slow. German civilization was built on systemic management and strict enforcement. But this American city was making him consider the problem on a different level. Was it possible for civilization to exist without being forced or reminded to be naturally whole? He continued walking. On an unremarkable corner, he saw a small neighborhood library. No gates, no security guard. A few elderly people sat on a bench outside, basking in the Sunday. A few children were inside, reading picture books. He walked in. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. The air smelled faintly of old paper. The floors were clean, the bookshelves orderly, the lighting soft. Young people were bent over their homework. Children turned pages softly. Even the service desk was quiet, responding only when needed. The entire space felt like the silently beating heart of the city. He picked up a book. It was a local study on the history of San Francisco's transportation development. From the early cable cars to the expansion of highways and the growth of smart transit systems over the past 20 years, every chapter was written with clarity and humility. He had rarely seen such an honest piece of urban scholarship. There was no exaggeration, no whitewashing. It presented problems, analyzed failures, and treated past mistakes as invaluable data. He sat and read for 2 full hours, feeling as though he were reading the confession of a nation he had never understood. He suddenly realized that his past judgment of America was not just wrong, but profoundly arrogant. He had never truly listened to its story, only measured it against a European template. At noon, he left the library. The sun was stronger now. He walked into a nearby corner store just to buy a bottle of water, but was stunned once again by the scene inside. It was a tiny bodega, but the space was used with incredible efficiency. The cashier was ringing up a customer while simultaneously chatting with a regular. A delivery app driver was scanning barcodes to pick up an order. In the back, 2 students sat at a small table, quietly discussing a report. The drink cooler wasn't just filled with soda. It had unsweetened iced teas, fruit juices, and yogurts, all neatly arranged, alongside local kombuchas and mineral waters with their sources clearly labeled. He chose a mineral water and a pre-made sandwich. At the counter, the cashier asked softly, "Want me to heat that up for you?" He replied instinctively, "No, thank you." Then he asked, "Is it okay if I sit here to eat?" "Of course, spoons and hot sauce are over there." The cashier's tone was neither overly effusive nor cold. It was like he was talking to a neighbor. He found a seat by the window. Next to him, a janitor in uniform was slurping down a cup of noodles. Heinrich noticed that after the man finished, he neatly gathered his trash, threw it away, and wiped down the table before leaving without anyone watching or reminding him. This scene hit him again. In Berlin, this would never happen. A European convenience store is a transactional space, not a place for social interaction or trust. But here, it was an extension of a supportive community ecosystem, another miniature civil society. He finally understood. American civilization wasn't in its flashy high-tech showcases. It was in how the system was hidden within every seemingly small, considerate action. 2 p.m. He finally arrived at the SFMTA Traffic Management Center. He had intended to use his status as an international consultant to point out some problems, but when he walked in, he was quiet. The person who greeted him was not a high-ranking official but a young engineer in his early 30s. His tone was gentle, and he spoke English with a casual, jargon-free clarity. He showed Heinrich their various traffic control systems, the green wave signal management, the real-time incident response platform, the user-configurable systems for different road users, and even a predictive AI model that prioritized people, not vehicles. This wasn't a simple copy of European models. This was a distinctly American system that had evolved on its own, a fusion of technology, sociology, geography, and culture. After the presentation, Heinrich was silent for a long time. The young engineer asked, "Do you have any recommendations, Professor?" He offered only a single sentence. "This is the first time I have ever seen humanity factored into a traffic algorithm." Back at his hotel, he opened his laptop and began to edit the report he had prepared. He deleted the words pastiche, imitation, and haphazard. He rewrote it, word by word, sentence by sentence. He wrote, "America's transportation is not an imitation. It is a system that starts from its own problems, uses technology to patch its gaps, and then wraps the hard edges in culture. From pedestrians to vehicles, from the elderly to the young, every detail considers the person. The system does not control people, it cares for them." After finishing, he closed his laptop and lay down on the bed, but sleep would not come. In his mind, he saw the faces of the elderly people basking in the sun at the library, the face of the bodega clerk asking softly if he wanted his food warmed up, and the janitor who cleaned his own table before leaving. These details were not the high-tech metrics he was used to, but they were a different level of human civilization. He felt a shame he had never known. As a German, he had spent his life proud that his country was a symbol of civilization. But after experiencing these things in the United States, he realized that civilization was never about industrial power or intelligent systems. It was about the moments when people treated each other with care, without needing to be reminded. That night, he sat on his balcony and ordered an iced tea. He thought back to his first day and his arrogant pronouncements. He opened his email and wrote to the conference organizers, requesting to hold an informal Q&A session with students. He wanted to publicly clarify his true understanding of America's transportation system, and he wanted to hear how young Americans saw their own city. The moment he hit send, he felt a lightness he had never experienced before, because in that instant, he finally set aside his status as a systems expert and became a student, truly beginning to understand another nation's civilization. The Q&A session with the students was arranged in a small lecture hall in the College of Environmental Design at 9:30 a.m. on a Saturday. The organizers worried it was too early, and on a weekend, originally expecting no more than 20 students. But when Heinrich walked into the room and saw young people filling every seat, with more standing against the walls, he was stunned. The moderator whispered to him, "Many of them have seen the documentary you did with the BBC, and many are from the urban planning and transportation departments. They heard you were coming and wanted to hear you speak honestly." In that second, his heart trembled. He saw young faces full of curiosity and patience. There was no hostility, no contempt. He had expected to be judged here, for he had publicly insulted their city, calling it a derivative civilization. But these students didn't respond with anger. They just sat quietly, waiting for him to speak. He took a deep breath. "Before I came to the US," he began, "I thought civilization was structure, it was systems. The metric was the on-time performance of a train in Berlin, the energy-efficient streetlights in Stockholm, the snow removal protocols in Zurich. But in the past few days, I have begun to question the standards I've held for 30 years. He paused, looking at every student in the room. I saw people on a train quietly giving up their seats. I saw a small child with a granola bar walk into a corner store without making a sound. I saw a grandfather holding his grandchild's hand at a crosswalk, whispering, "Let's just wait another second." I saw a janitor fold his used napkin neatly after wiping his table. In those scenes, there was no technology, no command, and no written rule. He took a solo trip to Portland, Oregon, wanting to see if the civility he had witnessed was an anomaly. He didn't notify any officials or request a reception. He simply booked a hotel near the Pearl District, planning to stay for 3 days and do nothing but walk. One evening, he walked deep into a residential neighborhood and saw a mother teaching her child to cross the street. The little girl looked at the walk signal and asked, "Can we go now, Mommy?" The mother smiled and nodded, but kept a firm grip on her hand. "Yes, but let's wait until the cars actually stop before we go." That phrase, "wait until the cars actually stop," stunned him. It wasn't about trusting the system, it was an understanding of human nature. No matter how perfect the traffic signal system was, it wasn't as profound as that single line of instruction. The next day, he visited a food cart pod and met a middle-aged man running a smoothie cart. The man smiled and asked where he was from. "Germany," he replied. The man beamed. "Well, there's nothing special here, just good air and nice people." A breeze swept through. Heinrich felt a strange sense of security, not of being protected, but of being accepted. He had never felt this way in a foreign country before. You didn't have to prove who you were to be worthy of respect. On the streetcar back downtown, a high school student took a sheet of paper from his backpack and began carefully filling it out. Heinrich glanced over and saw it was a volunteer application for the city's road safety program. The application stated, "I hope to volunteer at the school crosswalk to help keep my neighbors safe." He could hardly believe his eyes. This was the choice of a teenager not to apply for a science camp, not to study for a competition, but to stand on a street corner and wave a stop sign for strangers. This kind of choice had almost vanished in Germany. That night, he tossed and turned in his hotel bed. He finally understood. American civilization never needed to boast. It existed in every quiet, deliberate choice. It wasn't about aggressively proving, "I am advanced," but about gently doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. When he returned to Berlin, he wrote 2 articles and sent them to major German newspapers. One was titled, "In America, I Understood What Civilization Is." The other was, "Please, let us redefine the West." The articles sparked a massive debate on social media. Many Germans commented, "I can't believe America is like this. We thought we were the true model. We were just arrogant. If civilization isn't proclaimed but practiced in daily life, then have we regressed?" The BBC contacted him, hoping to produce a documentary series about his experiences in San Francisco and Portland. He didn't immediately agree. He simply said, "I am happy to film, but I don't want to interview celebrities or showcase technological achievements. I want to film the children at the crosswalk, the old man in the library at dawn, and the night shift worker in the corner store." The production team was initially skeptical. Will that really have an impact? He insisted firmly, "This is the essence of American civilization." After the program aired, comments poured in from viewers in the UK, Germany, and Japan. The one that moved him the most came from a British mother. "After watching your documentary, my son said to me, 'Mom, if I get to study in the United States in the future, I won't have to worry about my walk to school every day.'" After reading that sentence, he was silent for a long time. A few months later, he was invited to visit the US again. This time, it was an invitation from the city of San Francisco to be the inaugural speaker for their new International Urban Observers program. He accepted without hesitation. The moment he set foot on American soil, he was no longer a German expert looking for flaws. He was a traveler, returning to a familiar home. His first stop was not City Hall. He took the BART directly to Rockridge Station. The train car was just as quiet, the seats just as orderly. Passengers were reading, working on laptops, or just resting their eyes. He stood still, watching the lights of the tunnel rush past the window. A profound feeling welled up inside him. When the train reached the station, he didn't rush off. He sat back down in his seat, took out a pen and paper, and wrote a sentence. "I once thought civilization was a perfectly designed system. Now I know that is only the beginning. True civilization is when you no longer need to be reminded, yet you are still willing to do good for a stranger." This sentence would become the preface to the book he later wrote, The Reversal of Civilization, Everything I Learned in America. On his last night, he returned to the same corner store that had so moved him on his first trip. He bought a cup of soup, a can of local beer, and a sandwich. The clerk was a new person who didn't recognize him. He simply said softly, "Want me to heat that up for you, sir?" Heinrich smiled. "It's okay. I'll do it myself." He sat by the window, eating his meal, and watching the people on the street. In his headphones, he played a recording he had made of the BART train's ambient sound, not for research, but simply because he missed that quiet, steady hum. The night deepened. The light in the store was still warm. Outside, people walked past, each with their own destination, but there was no sense of chaos. He murmured to himself, "So, civilization isn't about a place becoming like Europe. It's about a European arriving here and finally being willing to shut up and learn." He glanced at a corner of the store. A small, handwritten sign was taped to the wall. Our shop may not be the fanciest, but we will do our best to make everyone who comes here feel at ease. He smiled. Civilization, he thought, is exactly that feeling. As the story ends, he is no longer an expert, no longer an observer. He is just another person who was changed by America. If you have ever been deeply touched by a gentle word or an unintentional act of kindness in some corner of a city, please leave a comment. Tell us what true civilization means to you. Don't forget to follow, as we will continue to share stories that are quiet but can overturn your understanding of the world. If you enjoyed today's content, please give it a like to help more people see the warmth of this city. Thank you for watching until the end. See you next time.